Okay, my name is Armin Falk. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Bonn, and I'm interested in studying personality, determinants of personality, social and economic consequences of personality, origins of personality, so why are we the people we are, what are the determinants like the social demographic background, genes, hormones, what is the co-evolution of preference, different sets of preferences and personality traits, and what are the economic consequences, for example, for social mobility, for labor market outcomes, or for health. Yeah, we're working on determinants of preferences and personality traits in general since many years now. One of the findings that comes up constantly is pronounced gender difference, for example, in risk-taking, risk attitudes. And as you probably may have guessed, women tend to be, on average, a substantial individual heterogeneity, on average to be more risk-averse than men. And we found this in representative data sets, for example, in Germany and other countries. And what we're doing right now is to look at data that comes from a very unique data set, which is 75 countries, representative for each of these countries. And if you look at the gender difference here, you find a significant gender difference, men being more willing to take risks than women. In roughly 2/3 of the countries, significantly so. You find this effect basically in all countries, but the extent to which you find it is quite different. And I think this is very interesting and informative, as it potentially allows us to explain difference in labor market participation of women versus men in different countries, for example, empowerment of women in different countries, or to understand different sets of institutions in these countries as a response to differences in preferences. Yeah, that is a very good question. We don't really know what the gender differences are. One potential channel is role models. So it goes back to education, basically, and role models that you're confronted with when you're young. By the way, we find this gender difference even among kids already. So it starts basically, that's the earliest we can get at age 4, and we find pronounced gender difference at age 8. There may also be some genetic or hormonal differences. An indication that speaks in favor of this is the age pattern in women and men is quite different. And it seems to reflect some hormonal differences and changes over the lifetime, differentially for men and women, again suggesting a hormonal basis perhaps.
By age pattern you mean their risk-taking behavior over age?
Right. So in one large data set, the so-called German socioeconomic panel, we are able to look at risk-taking behavior basically for all adults from 18 to 85, say. And we find two basic effects here. One is that risk-taking or willingness to take risks steadily declines, both for women and men. So elder people are less willing to take risks than younger people. And for each of these age categories, there's a substantial gender difference, with women always being more risk-averse than men. But the temporal pattern or the age pattern is not the same. So there are interesting differences in men and women, suggesting a hormonal influence. So we have looked at one of the potential hormones that might have or could be responsible for a difference in risk-taking, which is testosterone. And in one study that we did, it's a placebo-controlled testosterone study, which means that in one group, this is only in males, I should point out. In one group, people get testosterone, in the other, in the control group, they get a placebo. People don't know whether they are in the control or in the treatment group. And we did risk experiments, and we did not find a significant difference here. It doesn't rule out that testosterone does play a role, and it is a differentially important hormone between men and women, obviously. It doesn't rule it out, but at least the first approach that we took is negative in the sense that we didn't document any significant difference. So we study all kinds of preferences, including risk preferences, time preferences, and social preferences. Risk preferences are particularly relevant for a very simple reason. All decisions we take are taken under uncertainty. We never know the exact consequences of our decisions, and the world is just uncertain, which means that we have to take risky decisions no matter if we want to or not. So it's a very fundamental and important driver of behavior. There's nothing like an optimal risk attitude or optimal risk preference. What we do know, however, is that it is very predictive for many very important life outcomes. I give you one example. If you take the decision to enter a job that pays, say, a fixed pay, basically, versus a job that offers a flexible pay for performance scheme, if you like. The fixed payment may be lower, but you exactly know what you will get. In the other case, you're facing a risk. Depending on your performance, which may be influenced by luck, effort, etc., you will earn more or less. And typically these jobs pay, on average or in expected terms, a higher wage, but there's also more variance, it's more uncertain. And if you look at where people work, we find a very strong effect of risk preference. So people who are more willing to take risks are in fact working in these more risky jobs compared to others. If you bring this back to the question about gender differences, this is one potential explanation why we see the gender wage gap. If women are less willing to take risks, they optimally self-select to jobs that are paying a fairly fixed and safe payment, but in expected terms also a lower amount. So I'm not saying this is the only explanation for the gender wage gap. Discrimination, many things are going on as well, but it is a potential explanatory factor for why we see a substantial gender wage gap.
That's very, very interesting, and I'm sure it applies to a lot of different types of...
Yeah, for example, we have in a different study, we show that the migration decision in a country depends heavily on risk preferences. People who are more willing to take risks are migrating more often, and conditional on migrating at all further away. We also find that risk-taking is associated with likelihood to hold stocks versus... Now, in an optimal economic context, say, this should never happen, because you always take optimal decisions given the information you have and the preferences you have. But in fact, we do observe that people often regret their decisions, in particular if they learn that had they chosen otherwise, they would have been better off, even if ex ante the decision was optimal. Another factor that contributes to this effect, potentially, is not risk aversion or risk preferences, but overconfidence. And you were relating your finding to a gender difference, and there's another important gender difference in overconfidence. Guess what? Males are more overconfident than women typically. And if you're overconfident, then of course you make more mistakes, because you misinterpret the information that you have. You take the wrong decisions based on your false expectations or beliefs. And then more often, and the more overconfident you are, the more often you will experience disappointment or regret, and that may contribute to explaining why men struggle more than women in this movement to opportunity programs, for example. Is a potential explanation. I'm not saying it's the only one. One important, and this is related to the overarching theme of this research network, in studying preferences to better understand social mobility. It's a well-documented fact that social mobility is quite low in many countries, and that gives rise to increasing inequality. What we find in our work is a strong intergenerational transmission of preferences, which means that if you have parents who are more willing to take risks, the likelihood that you are willing to take risks is also much more pronounced. So it immediately follows that if you have parents who are, say, taking little risk or no risk, will take similar decisions as you will take later, and that contributes to understanding the observed social immobility from generation to generation. You were also asking about my work and policy implications. In another very recent set of questions, I'm concerned with understanding why people act immorally. I think this is a very important and hot topic. Think about the textile industry in Bangladesh, for example, with these horrible working conditions. People are burned and killed in working in factories that would never exist in countries like Germany or the US. But the mere fact that it's, you know, several thousand kilometers away apparently makes it possible for us to tolerate this type of production. And that is just one example for why I think understanding the origins of immoral behavior is so important. And I think there are two main contributors to understanding it. One is the personality. Some people are just more moral than others. Again, there's a gender difference in our data. The paradigm we use is about killing an animal for money, which we consider, and most people would consider, as immoral. Why? Because it's harming a third party in an intentional and unjustified way. Almost a universal definition of morality. So what we find is that women are killing less animals than men. More intelligent people are killing fewer animals than less intelligent people. This is understanding personality and morality. But there's another very important economic aspect to it, which is the institutions that guide or rule our behavior. And what we find in several studies now is that depending on the institution you are acting in or acting with other people, has a strong and significant effect on immoral outcomes. One paper that just came out in Science 2 weeks ago shows that in market interactions, the likelihood of immoral behavior is heavily increased compared to individual decision making. Now the interesting point to be made here is these are the same people. So they have a moral conception, and I'm not saying they should be more moral or less moral. This is not about personality. What I'm saying is, for a given moral conception, the mere fact that you act in institution A, markets, produces dramatically different moral outcomes compared to acting in institution B, in our case the individual condition. So understanding the interaction of personality and institutions, I think, is one of the key issues in resolving the problem of moral transgression in modern societies.
Great. Well, we'll definitely want to follow what other findings you guys come up with. Thank you very much. I want to make sure you...
Thanks.